evening. Tonight, Nigerians usher in 2021 with joy and gratitude amid renewed hope for a concerted effort to overcome the nation's many challenges in the new year. President Buhari urges Nigerians to remain hopeful in his New Year broadcast, reaffirms his administration's commitment to the well-being of the Nigerian youth and security of all citizens. We continue our review of the various sectors in 2020, and today we focus on how the country fared in its infrastructure. And new dawn in the United Kingdom as the country finally exits the European Union, plus business and sports and international news from our London studios.
On business news tonight, African Continental Free Trade Area kicks off today as the continent seeks to create a single market bloc valued at $3.4 trillion.
And in sports news tonight, Super Eagles and Napoli FC forward Victor Osimhen test positive for coronavirus.
In normal times, New Year is welcomed all over the world with much fanfare, characterized by joyful and sometimes wild celebrations. But that is not the case this year, as the whole world has been hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, which continues to ravage communities and cities across the globe. Notwithstanding, several cities came alive to usher in the New Year, albeit in a low key. Here in Nigeria, citizens ushered in 2021 with prayers and optimism for a more fulfilling year amid calls for the government to live up to expectations in 2021. And in line with that, the president has called on Nigerians to remain hopeful and work with the government to overcome the current challenges facing the country. Christians in the nation's capital and some states in the north were also part of today's prayers to mark the new year. The clerics asked the leaders to be sincere in delivering good governance to the people in 2021. For some of them, security must be strengthened at the country's borders, which they say have become very porous.
It's the first day of the year 2021, and worshippers at the Cathedral Church of the Advent Anglican Communion listened to the New Year message by the clergy on walking in faith and love this year. Most of them are observing COVID-19 protocols.
God will find a mother who has love.
According to the primate, Most Reverend Henry Ndukuba, this period calls for sober reflection. He charges political leaders to deliver on promises made to Nigerians and expresses concern over the security challenges facing the nation.
It marvels me when something happens, people are killed or attacked, and then the security agency or even the military will come out and say it is not true. And then after 2 days, they say it is only one. And then after another distance, they say it is only 15. Why not come out and tell the citizens that this is what happened? We need truth. We need sincerity. We need focus. We need purpose for this nation.
At the Christian Fellowship Mission, worshippers sing praises to God in appreciation of witnessing the first day of 2021. In Kaduna State, a cross-section of Nigerians are voicing the expectations from the federal government for 2021 with a call on President Buhari to rejig the nation's security architecture and improve the economy.
When truth has become relative, in the way I define it like this, then this country is in a very big mess. But when we grab the truth and say this is the reality of our problem, and we confront it headlong, brother, I tell you, this nation will be greater than the United States of America.
The government should really come into the aid of a lot of people because people are really suffering. The pandemic have brought a lot of hardship, untold hardship to many people. So the government should quickly do something to alleviate the suffering of the people.
Meanwhile, the Christian Association of Nigeria (CAN) in Yobe State is also asking President Buhari to give more priority to security to save lives and the Nigerian economy in 2021.
Security is still a challenge in Nigeria, most especially to those of us who are around the northeast here. The Maiduguri-Damaturu road is also a serious problem up to now. Kidnappings on the road and other things. We still plead with them that more efforts should be intensified, and also more efforts and the willpower to conquer this should be there this year.
In Taraba State, the chairman of the Christian Association of Nigeria is urging the federal government to come up with measures to flush out hoodlums who are causing restiveness in the country.
Every state of the nation is passing through hardship, and so let government come up with policies that will kick out all these evil people, whether they were brought by the government herself or whoever. Let them all be kicked out of this nation.
As the year 2021 begins, Nigerians are cautiously optimistic for better days in the new year.
Meanwhile, Christian faithful ushered in the new year in Lagos and other states in the southern part of the country with church services. During the services, which were conducted in compliance with COVID-19 guidelines, Christians were admonished to begin the year with renewed hope and faith in God, despite the challenges they faced in 2020.
I am crossing over. Lagosians ushering the new year in what can be described as an unusual crossover night service across the state. At some of the churches, congregants were full of thanks for making it to 2021. New Year's Day service at the Cathedral Church of Christ in Marina, Lagos is low-keyed with only a handful of worshippers. They appear conversant with the COVID-19 restrictions and have come prepared, observing social distance and donning face masks. The message is that of hope in the face of despair.
Before the end of this year, you will praise the name of the Lord. People will gather to celebrate Jesus because God started with God. Sinner and God, we do not have, but in the name of Jesus Christ, be lifted up. So on this year, you will be lifted up in the name of Jesus.
Similarly, at the Holy Cross Cathedral in the Lagos Island area, no one is allowed into the worship center without first undergoing a screening process. Despite all the challenges of 2020, parishioners look forward to a better year, bearing songs of praise. The Pope's message, which is based on the culture of care as a path to peace, is re-emphasized by the Archbishop of Catholic Archdiocese of Lagos, His Eminence Alfred Adewale Martins.
But one more important thing that the Holy Father has presented to us is the need to ensure that rather than spend money buying weapons of war, the leaders of nations should create a fund that they make contributions to. That when you create that fund and contributions are made to that fund can be used to take care of the kinds of issues that create conflicts and that make peace to be difficult to achieve.
Christians in Ekiti State also observed the first service of 2021 with praises, prayers, and words of encouragement from the pulpit. The message from Edo State is clear as Reverend Father Emmanuel Ogun asked Christians to begin the year on a sober mood and renewed faith in God.
Let us be prayerful. Let us do good things. Let us make sincere resolutions. Let us try as much as possible to, examine our lives. An unexamined life, said Socrates, is not worth living.
Although it's still early days, it's hope that these messages will be taken to heart by the congregants to enable them live better in the year 2021.
And from the president, it was a message of gratitude today as he gave an overview of the challenges of the past year and raised hope for a more fruitful year ahead in his nationwide broadcast. President Muhammadu Buhari thanked God for seeing the country through 2020 with the challenges of insecurity and the COVID-19 pandemic, while appealing to citizens to adhere to safety protocols to stop the spread of the virus. He also reached out to the country's youths, reaffirming his belief in their potential to help turn the nation's fortune around.
My fellow countrymen and women,
as the year 2021 begins, the number of deaths from COVID-19 in 2020 stands at 1,289. The president's New Year speech begins with a prayer for the souls of those who died in 2020, especially as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic.
We must also acknowledge the passing away of our brothers and sisters who didn't make it into this new year. May their souls rest in perfect peace.
In 2020, Nigeria turned 60, a milestone which the president reminds Nigerians has confounded the nation's critics who did not think the country would last this long. He speaks on the NSAS protests, calling them understandable.
2020 indeed came with a lot of challenges ranging from security and economic issues across the regions to understandable protests that were mainly led by youth and served notice to the demand for police reforms and accountability.
Security, the economy, and anti-corruption have been the pillars of the Buhari administration since inception. The president has been accused of delivering poorly in these areas. He pledges to do better.
We recognize that we rapidly have to move to a more proactive and preemptive posture to ensure that these sorts of traumatic incidents do not become a norm. The anti-corruption drive of our administration, we have recorded substantial gains so far and this year. We are committed to continuing along the path of eradicating corruption through collaboration with all the arms of government to effectively prosecute this fight.
President Muhammadu Buhari ends his speech with a request, asking Nigerians to obey the COVID-19 protocols while his administration works on getting a vaccine, while pledging to play his part in moving the country forward. He's also asking for cooperation from citizens to promote the Nigerian spirit of oneness, togetherness, and unity. From the State House in Abuja, Kayla Megwa, Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, the People's Democratic Party, PDP, has described the 2021 New Year address by President Buhari as empty and directionless. The party states that the president's speech underscores the urgent need for Nigerians to come together and salvage the nation, which it says is fast becoming a failed state.
The PDP laments as appalling that on a New Year day, all that President Buhari could offer a troubled and frustrated nation was a regurgitated script full of lame excuses and empty promises that addressed nothing. As president, President Muhammadu Buhari has not demonstrated the capacity to play his own part, as he claims, having failed to find solution for the security and economic challenges that has pervaded our nation under his lethargic watch. The myriads of lame excuses in Mr. President's address again underlines our national misfortune of a weak leadership that is unable to resolutely confront and vanquish bandits, terrorists, kidnappers, and vandals who are now holding our nation hostage, ravaging our communities, kidnapping and beheading our compatriots without restraint. The least Nigerians expected from Mr. President in the new year was a decisive will to tackle our security challenges by reviewing his parade and heeding the demands by eminent Nigerians, including the People's Democratic Party, that is to rejig our nation's security architecture.
In part two, after the break, find out what other leaders are saying from the National Assembly and states in their New Year messages. Please join us again. Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 live on Channels Television Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. Nigerians usher in 2021 with joy and gratitude amid renewed hope for a concerted effort to overcome the nation's many challenges in the new year. President Buhari urges Nigerians to remain hopeful in his New Year broadcast, reaffirms his administration's commitments to the well-being of the Nigerian youth and security of all citizens. We continue our review of the various sectors in 2020, and today we focus attention on how the country fared in its infrastructure. And new dawn in the United Kingdom as the country finally exits the European Union. A major priority for the National Assembly in 2021 is to ensure that Nigeria's economy exits its current recession. Now, this is the promise from the President of Senate, Ahmed Lawan, in his New Year message to the nation. Other critical legislation to be given priority include Constitution Amendment, Petroleum Industry Bill, Electoral Reforms Bill, support from the National Assembly to accelerate the containment of the COVID-19 pandemic and ensure security in the country. He also congratulates Nigerians on the new year in a statement that reads in part, "I felicitate with all Nigerians in this festive season and wish them joy and prosperity in 2021. The year 2020 was full of challenges on the economic, security, health, and other fronts for most nations of the world. Thankfully, however, the challenges could not dampen our hope for a better future for us as individuals and as a nation. As a legislature, we had prepared ahead by making the necessary legislation for the facilitation of good governance and economic growth." He adds that the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic and the shutdown of the economy adversely affected every country in the world, as it did Nigeria's economic projections and preparations. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila, in his New Year message, congratulates Nigerians for witnessing the New Year 2021, despite the challenges that came with the past year. The Speaker asked Nigerians to keep hope alive and use the experiences of the previous year, which he describes as very challenging, to work towards a better one. In his words, "It is my hope and prayer that the year 2021 will be better than all the preceding years of our nation's history. In this new year, let's remain resolute and determined in our nationhood. Yes, we may be going through challenges as a nation, but with our collective determination, we shall overcome." The Speaker also calls for continuous unity, peaceful coexistence among Nigerians, saying, "We have no other country than Nigeria." In the meantime, state governors across the country also have words of hope for their people as they embrace 2021. In their New Year messages, some of them, the state's chief executives, call for resilience on the part of the citizens while promising to work harder to deliver on their promises.
New Year's Day offers us
As the new year begins, governors across the state send in their New Year messages. For Rivers, the state governor, Nyesom Wike, says infrastructural development will continue to take priority in the new year. In his broadcast message, he announced his plan to begin the new year with the commissioning of projects in parts of the state from January the 4th.
Some of the completed projects were inaugurated earlier this month, while several more completed projects, including the Mother and Child Hospital, the Remadina Academy new buildings, the Corona of Flyover, the Sakwa Boridua Carriageway, the Boniman Ring Road, the 10-kilometer Bolo Itara Road, and the 2 Semi Nowa Kira Road are due for inauguration from the 4th of January 2021.
Staying in the South-South, Governor Godwin Obaseki of Edo State says he is determined to make Edo great again. In his New Year message, he promises to begin reforms in various sectors, including security, health, among others.
This reform exercise has started with over 1,400 vacancies declared that will be filled with young professionals who will utilize technology to enhance better service delivery for Edo people.
The ESCO people, the board and commissions.
And in the Southeast, the governor of Ebonyi State, David Umahi, is optimistic of a good year. a foundation which he believes has already been laid in infrastructure and agriculture, which will yield rapid economic empowerment and human capital development. For his Imo State counterpart, Hope Uzodimma, the focus in 2021 is growing the economy of the state, providing qualitative and affordable healthcare as well as infrastructure development. Meanwhile, Governor Samuel Otom of Benue State in north-central Nigeria has promised that his administration will be introducing programs that will give young people the opportunity to maximize their potential in entrepreneurship, particularly in the agriculture sector. The governor also reminds indigenous entrepreneurs of the existing opportunities, such as the partnership the state has with the Bank of Industry, BOI, to give loans at only 5% interest rate. Kaduna State Governor Nasir El-Rufai used the new year as an opportunity to order the release of 12 convicts. This is in the exercise of the powers conferred on him by Section 212 of the Constitution on the recommendation of the Advisory Council on Prerogative of Mercy. The pardoned convicts comprise of 10 people who are serving sentences of 3 years and above, with 6 months or less to serve. And in the southwest, one of the priorities of the Ogun State Governor, Dakwa Abiodun, will be to continue to improve the people's standard of living through the provision of critical infrastructure as early as January 2021.
I'm proud that we have kept our promise that all the inherited projects that have a direct bearing on the continued development of Adia State will not be abandoned. In fact, those that could no longer be used for the initial purposes will be converted to other uses for the benefit of the good people of Adia State.
For all the state governors, their messages are those of hope and faith, believing that the new year will be better for their state and the people therein.
Well, former military President General Ibrahim Babangida is challenging government at all levels to mobilize Nigerians against insecurity in the country, calling on citizens to be patient and hopeful. General Babangida says the year 2020 was a very challenging period, not just for Nigeria, but the entire world. He was speaking in an exclusive interview with Channels Television at his hilltop residence in Minna, Niger State, where he noted that Nigerians cannot afford to forget in a hurry the lessons learned from the year 2020.
It has been a very challenging period, not for this country alone, but I think throughout the world. If you look at the world, there is the COVID, then the economic situation, there are also issues of security. I hope and pray that 2021 will be better than 2020. But that depends on us, Nigerians. If we make the best use of the lessons we learned in 2020, what we need is the general mobilization of the citizen to recognize that the security threat is real. And once they do that, we should be able to mobilize the citizen.
Bringing the nation's infrastructure up to date with the demands of modern-day developmental reality remains a challenge for the nation. However, government continues to engage various means to bridge the huge infrastructure deficit, which is estimated to be about $100 billion annually. In continuation of our sectoral review, our correspondent Chris Elems examines Nigeria's infrastructure challenge.
Infrastructure remains the bedrock upon which any nation's growth and functionality are hinged. The recent investment in roads, rail, port and housing is critical in attracting investors to the economy. In a bid to bridge the huge infrastructure gap in the country, which hovers around $100 billion annually, an equivalent of about 189% of the projected federal budget, of $35 billion for 2021, the federal government has embarked on massive road rehabilitation and construction in various parts of the country. In November 2020, the Federal Executive Council approved $87 billion to upscale road projects across the 6 geopolitical zones, which exclude the Lagos-Ibadan Road Project and the Second Niger Bridge, which are under the Presidential Infrastructure Development Funds.
What I can say for sure is that substantial progress has been made. You cannot compare the state of the roads about 2-3 years ago with what we are having today. Just go to Apapa Oshodi and see the progress. Some 2 years ago, it wasn't like that. Nobody was even going towards Apapa axis. But now, people can move in there because all the completed sections have been open. Even on Lagos-Ibadan, you can see, compared to what it was 2 years ago, there are lots of areas that have been completed, expanded. And then, as you move towards Ibadan, you see a lot of, even go to Bini Shagamu, towards Ajeban, you see a lot of progress have been made, even on Third Mainland Bridge.
While budgetary allocation has remained largely insufficient in financing infrastructure, various tools, including the Sukuk bond, tax credit regime, and Nigeria's Sovereign Investment Authority, are becoming prominent. These have offered the country funding alternatives, which can still be improved upon through private sector participation.
Post-pandemic, my own estimation is that if we don't ramp up spending on infrastructure, we will fall further behind. A country can either stay stagnant, fall behind, or catch up with those who are running faster.
There's need to replicate commission like Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission, RCRC, at federal level. All states should have that and come out with legislation that will protect the investment of private sector.
With the 186-kilometer Abuja-Kaduna rail becoming operational, the $1.5 billion 156-kilometer Lagos-Ibadan channel, which is the first part of a new 2,733-kilometer Lagos-Kano standard gauge, has also commenced operation. Likewise is the 326-kilometer Warri to Itakwe standard gauge line. In the housing subsector, there appears to be a number of plans still in the pipeline, including the federal government National Social Housing Program, which aims to build 300,000 housing units for low-income earners. The constant congestion at the Apapa and Tinkan ports in Lagos is exerting a lot of strains on the nation's economy, as cost of cargo shipment has risen by over 500%. This is further compounded by a 1,000% increase in haulage fee for containers. In order to curb this lingering dilemma, an approval of $4.6 billion has been granted for the implementation of the first phase of the Ibom Deep Sea Port. With the construction of the Lekki and Bonny Deep Sea ports already ongoing, hope might be in the horizon. While these projects are laudable, sustained funding and the will to ensure completion is most desirable. Chris Elems, Channels Television News.
Well, the news at 10 returns, still on our sectoral review. Our correspondent, Chris Elems, and later, Professor Banji Oyeyinka join us. Welcome back. Our correspondent Chris Elems is with us in the studio. He joins us on the news at 10. Hi, Chris, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, same to you. And how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. So looking at infrastructure today, how would you say, from your perspective as a journalist, how would you say the country fared in 2020, infrastructure-wise?
Well, first of all, let's look at this space. For a very long time, this space had been neglected, abandoned. for upwards of, say, 40 years. And you know what that means. When you abandon a house for that long, anything could happen, you know. Rats could come in and, you know, just name it. And that exactly explains the Nigeria infrastructure space. A lot of abandoned projects. You know, just imagine during the colonial era, we had like 3,000 kilometers of rail network. But today, we don't even have 1,000 because we failed to, you know, upgrade, we failed to maintain it. And so that became a very, very huge problem. Right now, we're celebrating Warri to Itakbe, we're celebrating Lagos to Ibadan. Then they want to extend to Kano. And we're also celebrating Abuja to Kaduna. Well, all these together, they're not up to 1,000 kilometers. And we're spending so much. We're borrowing to actually deal with these deficits. So it's a very, very a big challenge that we have at the moment. Now, let's also just paint a picture of what is happening. We need according to experts, $100 billion to plug the gap annually. And you need to spend that for upwards of 30 years. That is like $3 trillion to be able to plug this gap. You know, 100 billion, you could say, well, I think we have the money. We don't have it. Because right now, oil is our major source of funds. You know, at the moment, we probably sell at $40 per barrel. And we produce like 1.8 million barrels per day. Now, if you do the mathematics, 1.8 million barrels of oil per day at $40 for 365 days, you'd come up with about $26.285 billion. And that is 1/4 of what we need every year to plug this gap. Every year. Okay, at this time, we're talking about a budget of about $35 billion. What we need is like 187% higher than our total budget. So assuming we're spending on nothing else, we're not spending on recurrent expenditure, and you just decide to say every money that comes from oil, we are putting into infrastructure, we still won't be able to plug the
Chris,
gap.
it's almost like you're saying nothing really happened.
No, a lot actually. A lot is going on everywhere. Remember the last time we had the minister here, he said about 600 roads actually being constructed. The federal government is also planning on plugging the about 22 million estimated housing deficit. And they're beginning with a national housing social program that should provide like 300,000 houses, you know, to low-income earners. A lot happening. But because the ocean is just too big, so whatever they do right now, it's more like a droplet. And that is why experts, they are advocating that budgetary allocation isn't enough.
And we have one expert. We have one expert joining us now. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Let's quickly switch to Professor Oyeyinka for more on this. We'd like to thank you, Professor Banji Oyeyinka, who's joining us via Zoom from Ibadan. What's your assessment of the state of Nigeria's infrastructure in 2020? And this is against the backdrop of where the country should be in its developmental aspirations.
Thank you very much for having me here. Chris has laid it out very clearly. It's a historical issue that we have. We've neglected the house for so long. Rats have eaten up everything. So what we have here is, as I said the other time, when you are running a race, you can stay stagnant, you can fall far behind, or you can try to catch up. What we are trying to do now is that we've been in stagnation for a very long time in almost all sectors, rail, road, bridges, everything. So what I will, from what Chris laid out in his report, is that the government cannot do it alone. We need to improve the governance system. We need to improve on ease of doing business so that investors can come into Nigeria. This is one of the biggest bottlenecks today. It's not so much a technical issue. It's the human problem that we have, the governance, the politics, the bureaucratic environment, that we all know. If Nigeria's governance system is corrected today, we'll have a lot of investors coming into this country. There's so much money all over the world waiting to come into an economy such as we have the population, we have the market. But yet, because of our governance system, because I'm sorry to say, because of the corruption at so many levels, it's been very difficult. So we have to find an alternative ways to deal with this, so that other monies can come in, beyond the normal government appropriation
Fund.
that is done.
You talked about a lot of obstacles in achieving, this drive. But what would be the most critical infrastructure that you think government should focus on?
Right now, there are three categories of infrastructure. You have the soft infrastructure, which is usually not very visible to the common, to the visible eye, like education and health. The pandemic has exposed us, so we need to build back a very resilient health infrastructure, and again, both from primary, secondary, and tertiary health sectors. And we do not have to have only government in this space. This is the point that your report is showing. We need to find a way to bring in other monies all over from anywhere they can come from. So there's soft infrastructure that is missing, because health is productivity. Anytime you increase a change in unit of health spending, it increases GDP per capita by almost 0.4%. So we have to focus on that. The second side, of course, is the physical infrastructure, which is also what is the backbone of industrial progress, railroad, and all sorts of things that we need to put in place. And of course, also you have certain critical infrastructure, telecom backbone, and all of those things that is required for today's kind of security. We're in the fourth industrial revolution, and we need to ramp up to meet up with other parts of the world in terms of Korea, for example, spend over $3,000 per person on health. We spend about 60, 70. Other countries, Sweden, I'm not comparing us to those countries, but that gives us sort of a sense of where we are at today.
And where we need to get to. Thank you so much, Professor Banji Oyeyinka, for joining us on the News at 10 tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
And for some business news, here's Teniola Shibwali.
Thanks a lot, Millicent. Welcome to Business News. Trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area has commenced today after months of delay due to the coronavirus pandemic. With a market of about 1.2 billion people valued at $3 trillion, the commencement ushers in a new economic era for the continent, with businesses now open to a single market. The AFCFTA Secretary General, Mene Wamkele, while speaking at the official launch of the economic bloc today, says the agreement should be an instrument for Africa's development, with the ability to lift hundreds of millions of Africans out of poverty. Mr. Wamkele adds that the continent has to take active steps in ensuring this industrial development is accelerated in order to boost national economies and reduce over-reliance on global supply chains and export of primary commodities. In the meantime, President Muhammadu Buhari has expressed optimism and readiness that the full reopening of Nigeria's land borders will boost trade relations with other West African neighbors in a fair and legitimate way. The president, in his New Year message to Nigerians, listed the key focus of his administration in ensuring economic growth through diversification.
We are also currently rebuilding our national infrastructure base, and in the process, introducing transformation through the rehabilitation, modernization, and expansion of the railway system, national roads, and bridges both in rural and urban centers alongside the airports and seaports. With the recent opening of our borders, we expect that the pent-up demand of legitimate cross-border and international trade will boost the fortunes of the many small businesses and agricultural enterprises that depend on Nigeria trade and commerce. The message to our West African neighbors is that Nigeria is once again fully open for those willing to conduct business in a fair and equitable way.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari speaking there. Meanwhile, Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company, Mr. Bismarck Rwani, says that attaining the needed growth and attracting the right investors goes beyond reopening of the land borders. Speaking on our program, Business Morning, Mr. Rwani stresses that if there is no stability in policies implementation, Nigerians won't be able to tell the difference between the economy in 2020 and 2021.
So one is making the adjustment. Two is maintaining the flexibility of the exchange rate. And we'll talk about that. So that's one. Two, opening the borders. So when you open the borders, and three, just, selling as much forex to manufacturers so that output increases. If output increases and there's stability of the exchange rate and there's flexibility of that exchange rate within a normal curve, you will find that all of a sudden investor expectations, consumer expectations, and policy makers' expectations will be aligned. When that happens, what drives inflation more than anything else? Expectations of shortages. If that comes down, then inflation begins to reduce. Investments begin to increase because of stability of policy. And then you begin to see an increase in growth. Growth, at the end of the day, is the main thing.
And that's Business News tonight. It's back to you, Millicent.
Thank you, Taniola. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has sent a message of healing to the world for 2021, a year he prays will bring rays of hope. In his New Year's message, Mr. Guterres says that the world should work in unity and solidarity against the backdrop of a year dominated by the COVID-19 pandemic and the persistent suffering and grief it has brought with it.
2020 has been a year of trials, tragedies, and tears. COVID-19 upended our lives and plunged the world into suffering and grief. So many loved ones have been lost, and the pandemic rages on, creating new waves of sickness and death. Poverty, inequality, and hunger are rising. Jobs are disappearing and debts are mounting. Children are struggling. Violence in the home is increasing and insecurities everywhere. But the new year lies ahead, and with it we see rays of hope. People extending a helping hand to neighbors and strangers, frontline workers giving their all, scientists developing vaccines in record time, countries making new commitments to prevent climate catastrophe. If we work together in unity and solidarity, these rays of hope can reach around the world. That's the lesson of this most difficult year. Both climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic are crises that can only be addressed by everyone together as part of a transition to an inclusive and sustainable future. The central ambition of the United Nations for 2021 is to build a global coalition for carbon neutrality, net zero emissions by 2050. Every government, city, business, and individual can play a part in achieving this vision. Together, let's make peace among ourselves and with nature, tackle the climate crisis, stop the spread of COVID-19, and make 2021 a year of healing.
UN Chief Antonio Guterres. Now, after 47 years of membership, the UK has completed its divorce from the EU, leaving the bloc single market and customs regime more than 4 years after voting for Brexit. The end of the transition period at 11 p.m. in London on New Year's Eve launched the UK on a new path on its own, free from EU laws, able to strike trade agreements around the world and to reshape its economy. Let's head over to our London studios where Simon Pusey has more on this and other international news and around the world in 5.
Good evening and welcome to the Channel Studios here in London with your international news around the world in 5. Millions around the world have been seeing out 2020 and marking the start of 2021, although the coronavirus pandemic has forced many celebrations behind closed doors. With lockdowns or other restrictions in place in many countries, many would-be New Year partygoers were told to have a quiet night in. Others have attended ceremonies or festivals wearing masks or taking other precautions. In Japan, the pandemic overshadowed New Year's Day festivities, the biggest holiday in the national calendar, and thousands visited Meiji Shrine in Tokyo to pray for the end of the pandemic. France's famous Champs-Élysées Avenue welcomed in the new year with an eerie silence as the clock struck midnight and police controls were in place to make sure everyone stuck to an 8 p.m. curfew in order to control the spread of the virus. Similar scenes were seen in London, where streets were devoid of the usual New Year's Eve celebrations due to the government's stay-at-home order. While in New York, only a handful of invited guests, including healthcare workers and others from the front lines of the coronavirus pandemic, gathered in Times Square to witness the dropping of the New Year's Eve ball, marking the end of a sobering 2020 and a hopeful start to 2021. The United Kingdom has left the European Union, turning its back on a tempestuous 48-year liaison for an uncertain post-Brexit future. Britain's Big Ben rang out at 11 p.m. London time to mark the end of the Brexit transition period. Celebrations were rather muted due to ongoing restrictions, not to mention the divides in opinion over Britain's course. Prime Minister Boris Johnson used his New Year's message to hail a new dawn for the UK.
This is an amazing moment for this country.
But in Scotland, where support for independence has risen partly due to Brexit, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon tweeted that they would be back soon and asked Europe to keep the light on. Meanwhile, across the Channel in northern France, the first trucks hauling goods over the new customs border presented their clearance documents to French agents before loading onto a train to pass through the Eurotunnel. British and European businesses have warned of future disruption at the border as they learn to navigate a wall of red tape and paperwork. Australians have sung a different version of their national anthem from today after Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced a change to the lyrics. The reference to the country being young and free will be removed amid calls to recognise that its indigenous people are the oldest continued civilization in the world, changing it to "For we are one and free." The announcement was a surprise but welcomed across the government. Mr Morrison said he hopes the changes will create a spirit of unity. Swedish rescuers and Norwegian dog handlers are preparing a risky ground search for 10 people missing after a hillside collapsed in Norway. 10 people were injured, one of them critically. The landslide swept away more than a dozen buildings in the early hours of Wednesday, according to reports. Police said some 700 people had been evacuated from the area. Rescue workers continued to search the area for children and adults who are feared to have been caught in the mud and debris. Conditions remain challenging, with the clay ground still too unstable for emergency workers to walk on and temperatures registering -1 degrees. Tensions are mounting in Iran in the build-up of the first anniversary of the US drone strike that killed the top general Qasem Soleimani. In the memorial ceremony, Soleimani's successor, Esmail Ghani, underlined how his killing will not deter Iranian resistance and the country is still ready to respond. On Thursday, Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif accused US President Donald Trump of attempting to fabricate a pretext to attack Iran and said Tehran would defend itself forcefully. And finally, Pakistan's famous truck art will move from its highways to the skies as a flying academy is painting a two-seater Cessna aircraft with the colourful technique. With elaborate and flamboyant motifs, Pakistani truck art has become one of the South Asian country's best-known cultural exports. According to the artist, the aim is to send Pakistani culture around the world in the form of airplanes, with the hope to get to paint Airbus or Boeing aircrafts in the future. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel Studios in Lagos.
Thank you, Simon. Let's bring you some sports news. Here's Ayotunde Balogun.
Many thanks, Millicent. Super Eagles forward Victor Osimhen has tested positive for COVID-19 on his return to Italy from Belgium. The 21-year-old has been sidelined since November 2020 after dislocating his shoulder while representing Nigeria in the Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers. His Serie A club Napoli FC confirmed that the 21-year-old is currently asymptomatic and has not come into contact with the rest of the squad. The positive test could rule him out of the Italian Super Cup against Juventus on January the 20th. Super Falcons forward Rashidat Ajibade has joined Atletico Madrid in the Spanish Women's Top Flight League. Ajibade, who spent the past 2 years in Norway, has signed with Atletico until 2022. The 21-year-old, who previously played for FC Robo Queens in Lagos, says moving to Atletico is a great privilege and that she is excited to be a part of the team. She admits the move is a step up in her career and she's ready for the challenge. In the English Premier League, Thomas Souček scored a late winner for West Ham United against an uninspiring Everton at Goodison Park. The Hammers picked up a third away victory in 5 games despite missing some key players. And the game between Manchester United and Aston Villa ended as the Red Devils beat them by 2-1. Pep Guardiola has confirmed that Manchester City will be without 5 players for Sunday's Premier League trip to Chelsea owing to positive tests for COVID-19. City revealed there had been 4 positive cases at the club on Christmas Day, including 4 players, Kyle Walker and Gabriel Jesus. A further round of testing found 3 more cases among the Man City squad on Monday, leading to the match being called off just 4 hours before kickoff. And that sports news is back to you, Millicent.
And the main news again. Nigerians today ushered in 2021 with joy and gratitude. Although the celebration was dampened by the COVID-19 pandemic, the citizens expressed hope that the nation's many challenges would be overcome in the new year. Also today, President Muhammadu Buhari asked Nigerians to remain hopeful and reaffirmed his administration's commitment to the well-being of the Nigerian youth and the security of all citizens in his New Year broadcast. Plus, the UK today finally exited the European Union after the completion of a tortuous negotiations. And just before we go, news just in says that the Catholic bishop that was kidnapped in Imo State has been released. We have more updates on that story, perhaps at 12. That's your news at 10 tonight. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. Have a good night and Happy New Year once again.